All right. Think I got a good show for you today. We're going to cover Jean Baudrillard's America. It was written in the late 1980s, I want to say, and I think it's a landmark and hallmark book because it's one of the first times a foreigner, specifically a European, has seen America for what America is, not what the world imagines or hopes it to be as is manufactured in the programming. And that's sort of what we're going to cover today. I wanted to originally go backwards more, start with his earlier works, Jean Baudrillard's The Consumer Society, in which he sees that we've moved from, if the concerns used to be modes of production and production itself, we've moved to a consumer society. Who cares about production when it's easy to consume, when it's easy, at least while it's affordable, and while the goods are manufactured in mass like the people. So, getting into his story here, what Baudrillard realizes about America then is that the idealism that Europe had, America made manifest in the flesh, meaning they built Utopia. And the thing about utopias is they aren't what they seem, which is why all the literature on them focuses on, well, in the process of creating one, eventually at its furthest point it becomes reversed, and if a utopia is a heaven on earth, Baudrillard in the meantime is giddy with how great America is because he understands what makes America great and what makes Americans great. And part of that is our shallow, arrogant culture that is a desert. Not just a desert of the real, but the desert where the human ego gets swallowed up and by both the land is reflected in, let's say, something like the desert, as well as the media that is a totalizing force. We're going to begin here in his book called America, where he's talking about Irvine. And if you're not familiar with Irvine, it's a giant industrial center along the 5 freeway, and if you remember what Circuit Cities and Best Buys kind of look like, it's like that, but for industrial properties. So it does have the look, especially on an aerial photograph or a topographic map, it has the look of silicon or a computer chip, which he observes. So Baudrillard says, or writes, Irvine, a new Silicon Valley, electronic factories with no openings to the outside world, right? Like giant boxes, like integrated circuits, a desert zone given over to ions and electrons, a superhuman place, the product of inhuman decision making. By a terrible twist of irony, it just had to be here in the hills of Irvine that they shot Planet of the Apes, right? It was the Earth all along. But on the lawn, the American squirrels tell us all as well, right? So that's a quick shift, French wit into humor, talking about it. But if you look on the lawns, you'll see squirrels dancing about, well manicured lawns. That's also America. So the squirrels are there to tell us that America is kind to animals, to itself, and to the rest of the world. And that in everyone's heart, there is a slumbering squirrel. The whole Walt Disney philosophy eats out of the hand with these pretty little sentimental creatures in gray fur coats.
He despised Mickey Mouse, especially his hands. I think he has 3 fingers. He could not handle the fact that the power over multi-millions of human beings was in the hands of this 3-fingered, foolish creature that taught you nothing whatsoever, that expressed nothing real, total absurd fucking fantasy, not even good, not even creative. He was appalled by Mickey Mouse. And I said, well, what about Walt Disney? He was a crazy sort of a guy. He was eccentric. He was a genius. He was amazing. He was a visionary. He had all of these ideas. And he said, yeah, but for what? Well, I said, to expand the imaginations and fantasies of little children. Yeah, to this 3-fingered son of a bitch who has no soul, for Christ's sake. Mickey Mouse doesn't have a fucking soul.
For my own part, I believe that behind these smiling eyes there lurks a cold, ferocious beast, fearfully stalking us. On the same lawn with the squirrel stands a sign put there by some society or other of Jesus. Vietnam, Cambodia, Lebanon, Grenada. We are a violent society in a violent world. right? Ask Iraq and Afghanistan and Palestine. We're going to diverge from the text here a bit, but this is him talking about the American television and the sitcom specifically. So Baudrillard writes, laughter on American television has taken the place of the chorus in Greek tragedy. It is unrelenting. The news, the stock exchange reports, and the weather forecast are about the only thing spared. But so obsessive is it that you go on hearing it behind the voice of Reagan or the Marines' disaster in Beirut, even behind the advertisements. It is the monster from Alien prowling around in the corridors of the spaceship. It is a sarcastic exhilaration of a Puritan culture, right? Talking about the WASPs, the Western Anglo-Saxon Protestants, and the real Brahmin of America. In other countries, the business of laughing is left to the viewers. Here, their laughter is put on the screen, integrated into the show, right? The sitcom, the laugh track. It is the screen that is laughing and having a good time. You are simply left alone with your consternation. So this is hilarious to me because I read this just last week, and it was only at the beginning of April I wrote this little story here. And this was hilarious to me because I just read this last week, and at the beginning of April, a little bit over a month ago, I had just written this article. As I said, I started a Substack, putting some of my excess creativity there. But I happened to write this article called Full House Making Easy Programming for the Masses. And as you can see, we got our WWE star right here. That's a Worldwide Federation Wrestling. Um, I don't remember the exact ones. We got Diddy, the American Dream. We got all the little blonde girlies. We got this guy who wishes he was John Travolta. Got Nancy Reagan over here. We got Cortez and the crew. Got Cosby, Epstein, Weinstein, Turtle Man. The whole family's here, right? So going on, it begins. This is me writing about my experience of Full House as a child. As a child, I remember watching Full House and wondering, who were these weird people and what's wrong with them? These caricatures of Americans on American television were nothing like Americans you'd ever find in real life. And it wasn't simply because these cartoon humans are played by a completely different and removed class of people than the average American consumer for whom such shows are even made. It also wasn't that these play. Oops, sorry if you're reading along there. It wasn't also that these play actors' words were not organic and sincere productions, but cleverly scripted dialogue is written by the show's writers, who are generally not actors themselves. More so, it wasn't just that this single parent working class family lived in a McMansion in San Francisco and never seemed to spend a moment outside or talk about anything real. There was something far more unsettling underneath the media mask of a 1990s spiritual successor to something as uncannily corny as Leave It to Beaver. As Beaver himself acted, um, oh, this mouse is janky. Excuse me for a few. As Beaver himself acted out, the sitcom is a strange imitation of real life, yet there is nothing normal about it, either its creation or its writing, or the classes who produce such products. Yet, as a bland product being constructed by mass appeal for theoretically real people, the strangest thing about the American sitcom is it's written in a representative sort of code, in a repressive sort of code, that is stand in for another sort of code, the kind of which would be undecipherable to real human beings, leading to the impression that the people in these sitcoms, along with the reflection of the real human world that they inhabit, which is also scripted for the show, was created by aliens or some other non human entity. Even young me could begin to fathom, is someone holding these people hostage? Yes, this is beyond fake, but even then, blink twice if yes, once if no. And then it wasn't until more recently I realized that other people noticed this too. And what they say about it is the only thing creepier than an American sitcom with a laugh track is it only becomes creepier and more uncanny if you remove the laugh track. So even creepier, what is this horrible disembodied laughter? Where does it come from and why? Full House was never funny. Not a single character, line, or aspect of Full House ever made a real living human being laugh. Yet, for some inexplicable reason, right, and realize that doesn't preclude simulations of human beings laughing. I said real human beings, whatever that might mean. A sitcom isn't art, but it is distinguished by its lack of art, a sort of total contrivance and unreality that requires no suspension of disbelief, but is somehow there, acceptable. Am I asserting some people were and are prisoners of their TV? Not quite. For what I bring to light is to show these how easy these shows go down the American consumer gullet, so as to create no pressure, tension, or dyspepsia. You're just one of the CBS, ABC, NBC, and most recently the Fox family, you can suppose, right? Because people tend to forget that Fox is the most recent network. It's only 30, 40 years old. Because it's easy to forget that those other networks had the monopoly on the American mind. So all the propaganda against the Fox network, it's still around to this day, and it's framed in politics, but that just helps you forget that it's the same people putting out the same programming for the same dollars. Anyway, the American sitcom has one rule: never be funny. A real American sitcom, which is the wonder bread of television, along with its spicier everything bagel equivalent, is the soap operas, primarily for women, is never created with the intention to make people laugh, but only engage so as to maintain their attention. The desire is neutralized in the lack of humor, spice, zest, and wonder bread programming or sitcom. It's like cult indoctrination. You begin small, small asks that you're watching is good enough to start, and then you continually consent with your attention and your eyeballs, and you just say, yes, Crest, show me the white teeth. Yes, Coca-Cola, you are it, right? We worship it, right? Nike, just do it. If there wasn't a better thoughtless American slogan, it's Nike. Anyway, we got the everything bagel, which is the soap opera. It's not made to make people laugh, so keep them in a semi-glazed, reduced state of consciousness by way of this programming, which is so asinine as to create no real resistance in the viewer. And then I could further add that it's to make you forget that resistance exists or is possible, even. And then if there's time to show resistance on TV, you can do that too. It's the same slot because it keeps the viewer engaged, and by engaged, I mean in a larval state of consciousness. So, with this lack of resistance also arises the inability to take any possible resistance as serious, no different than the characters, the plots, the shows. The message of the shows are clear. Americans are not a serious people and they are not meant to be taken seriously, no matter their position inside or outside the family, in, inside or outside the family. More laughs, more clapter, enthralled. To create the thrall, you are the programming. You carry the message you were programmed to, right? You are the medium in the message, and the message is you. From the gestures and grunts to speaking to writing to acting to recording to broadcasting to telegraph, social media, and even a text like the good news of the Holy Bible itself, in all mediums, the same occurrence is taking place. People are sending the messages of the ultimate consequence of their beings, right? The fatality of it, and those which came before, an education of how to act, what will get you paid and punished, very narrow lines, very low pay in most cases. This has nothing to do with morality and not yet even value judgments. Here, it is the only thing to note that it is happening and has been happening for a long time. To wit, the sitcom, at least prior to Fox Network staking their cynical claim with modernity's non tragic last man hero Al Bundy, who was a cynical asshole who got laughter and claps for surviving his horrible family and his horrible life and his miserable job as a shoe salesman, where he, as a character and a football jock, peaked in high school. And if there couldn't have ever been a better character to represent America, it is the jock who peaked in high school. This is the problem with building Utopia. This is the problem with first and best dressed is you set the standard and then you yourself can never top it, right? So when people go, well, things seems like things are wrong in America. We got lots of problems. We should fix them. It's like, yes, and they're only going to get worse because this is the direction we go in and we move in one direction here, right? It doesn't mean there's not obsolescence, retrieval, reversal, but it still only moves in one direction. By that I mean we look to the past to see what's ahead. That's the rear view mirror. It's not actually looking behind us. What does that mean, right? Same reason why I'm looking to the past right now. It's because the future of the future is the present. Right. And as McLuhan pointed out, it was generally artists, philosophers, thinkers who were the only ones who could see the present. Why? Because it's always been like this? In some sense, yes. But namely in modern times, because this is the programming of the media, is that characteristic obliviousness to it all. So, and we're going to get to that too, and why the desert is the symbol of America, not just as the desert of the real. So, picking up here, again, Al Bundy, all these comedies, all these sitcoms was little more than Sesame Street for a more adult population, which is to say, a poorly masked public service announcement. Now, kiss and make up, be good little stooges, do what you're told, learn to share, right? That kind of stuff, by hidden societal fungineers putting forth their own Platonic and Christian ideal. The American family institution needs to be FCC approved and look and sound like this: utter clapter that kept bad writers and hack middlemen working far longer than it ever should have. Ooh, I'm swinging hard there, aren't I? So if a sitcom is never funny, why call it a comedy? Answer: doublespeak, doublethink. If the sitcom is written in code, as I stated earlier, then the code for the code tells you everything you need to know about the repression itself, especially when it comes to representing men as idiots, oafs, losers, Al Bundys, Homer Simpsons, and other supposedly lovable idiots. It's called comedy only because you can't call it interesting or thrilling or drama or any sort of theater a hapless viewer or impressionable child might actually want to stumble into as they flip through the ever rising number of channels. Now I'd add endless channels. Comedy as a name and brand here is not only more accessible, but carries a connotation of zest, spice, something surprising, tasty, exciting, which is to say, painful or dangerous, an objection of sorts. Yet sitcoms are the epitome of safe programming. That's why they're made. The sitcom is fruit of the corporate network, is a private orchard where money trees blossom, and this orchard is a privately, corporately owned, managed safe space for advertisers. One that constantly reminds the viewer, as if a warning, you're a valued member of the Cosby family. This is why the average American Cosby is so concerned with their reputation, with morality. It's even creepier with the original Cosby, not just his Spanish fly routine, but that he was so concerned of being seen as a moral and good person, a real stand up of the quote unquote African American community, or whatever contrivances these sort of predators generally hide behind. Masses of people will not save you or protect you, or your legacy. A real Christian through and through. What I hardly want to make the reader consider is just how many real Cosbys are out there, constrained only by their own cowardice of circumstances, lack of money, or protection. I would wager all the money in the world and its future that there's enough absurdity, disgust, hatred, and repressed desire, need in the average human that 50 to 100% of them have to work on a daily basis to supposedly suppress their immoral behavior or instincts for the good of the species. The smallest percentages live in positions free of consequence of others. A large portion of both of these release or inflict themselves as they want, as they can, as programmed, but are considered crazy or abnormal by polite society, right? These are our criminals, our mentally ill, and the easiest ones to control typically wind up back in jail or state custody, while the millions and billions outside the world's largest prison systems are much more difficult beings to constrain, repress, and control, which is why the programming works so well. It's not the ones inside the asylum anyone has to concern themselves with. It's the free people one has to observe and monitor and surveil and keep close tabs on and data files, right? So cue the need of the endless signs, signals, laws, and the perpetual programming and reprogramming of the masses. So interesting thing about American identity is it's new on the world stage of history. It's manufactured and it's been remanufactured over time. I go on. Identity for Americans is as manufacturable, programmable, and disposable as the machines is displayed on, and I could also say as operable as the, what do you call it? We have methodologies and we have orders of operations, but we don't have morals or values, right? So no other, right? We're a pragmatic society. That's John Moore's Utopia. So no other people in all human history have had to undergo so many identity and mass changes before an era was ever over. So in the last century, Americans became like different generations of different people who obsolesced, died off, and now they're gone, and we're on to the next class or generation, right? So, right, because think turn of the century, right? The last century, right? The prior, the 18th to the 19th, the 19th to the 20th, right? We didn't have internet, we didn't have TV, we didn't even have telephones. So this is all very new. And that's the funniest thing about human history, not just the last 100 years, 200 years, the last 2,000 years. It's all very recent. No other people in all human history have had to undergo so many identity and mass changes before an era was ever over within such short time period. So it makes sense as to why America is one, the mental illness and schizophrenia capital of the world, and two, explains the need for so much governmental safety projects, initiatives, and safe space programming as possible. These people's fragile minds cannot handle anything remotely real. Good thing the creation and prescription of dangerous mind altering substances has never been more popular. cue the Prozac, cue the Xanax, right? You can forget that you're a human being, right? That the most popular business in the world is civilization, the ever more sophistication of humanity's creations of simulations, right? The creations of new needs. That is the point. I think Marx saw that as the problem. Nietzsche saw that as the driving goal, right? That's the danger of everyone buying into the American fantasy. So I go on to say here, I saw more Full House than I care to admit. And I couldn't even tell you how many episodes I saw, but I know I saw more than I should have, more than is healthy for the mind. But I don't mind admitting, for young me was a young anthropologist and psychologist, determined to see into what was on the other side of this totally manufactured simulation of reality. And when you stare into the abyss, Full House stares back at you. Right? Some philosophical humor there for you. Um, yes, the only episode I can recall, the only conflict I can recall out of at least dozens of episodes that sticks in my memory was when the blonde girl wore the bigger blonde girl's purple shirt, right? And they all had names like Stephanie, Becky, Sarah. I think two of which are my cousins' names, right? So, I'm all American too. Yet the only episode I can recall with the blonde girls was the bigger blonde girl's purple shirt affair. It was ugly. The sister not only took the shirt without asking, the little girl did, the middle sister, but then spilled mustard on it and then shrunk the shirt while trying to wash it. Right, first world problems. This is the kind of things that was programmed to be on the American's mind, where she gave up and gave it to the youngest blonde girl. You'd have thought the world was ending, so catastrophic was getting a stain on what was already an ugly shirt, because it was like a central conflict in the episode. It was the only conflict. Maybe there's another character arc, and by character arc, I mean someone else spilled the ketchup on their guitar or something, right? So uh, so catastrophic, right? But no, I was being educated. Is this why Americans are so neurotic, obsessive, covering things in plastic, taking drugs all the time? The TV enforces the thinking, the behavior, the banality, a digression.
You snotty little bastard.
The moral of the TV story, as I remember it, is as timeless, as Christian, as classically for simpletons and idiots. Just be honest. Why did you lie to me? You should have told me the truth. The truth?
You want answers? I think I'm entitled. You want answers? I want the truth. You can't handle
The
it.
truth in Cosby's America, in Weinstein's Matrix, on Epstein's Island, right? We call it the island because it's kind of like Hotel California. You can check out any time you like, but you can never leave. The truth in Cosby's America, as packaged and sold by the cola and other advertisers, right? Coke is it. Nike, just do it. These made for TV Wonder Bread crackers are out of their damn bread box. The worst thing that could ever happen in America, amongst Americans, especially about politics, power, religion, family, or anything else, is for anyone ever to tell the truth. When the last Eichmann lives longest, there's no standards, measurements, or even terminology for the way present and past humanity devoured the future, spilling mustard on their ugly shirts for all eternity in the process. The devastating effects of one too many hot dogs. So the truth would break America if the shockwave from the death of God hadn't already broke what was left of it. First, uh, hadn't already broke what was left of it first. People tend to think of clear pictures or measured and real dividing lines, when in reality, breakage, its fractures, and even its implements and incidents never need to be coherent, adhere to any previous history, even when the archaeology may be studied from a distance. See that time GM let someone's crazy wine-drunk aunt design a car here. So that's getting into another article of mine.
It's a funny accident. A $2 million design exercise that's worth 10 times that in sheer traffic stopping ability.
So this race to the bottom makes one thing clear. There's no bottom so banal, so low, so normal that the American corporation and its media wouldn't enact it against its audience. Wow, powerful stuff, right? Anyway, so I mentioned Marshall McLuhan's Four Laws of Medium, right? And we can see from our pictogram here, right, our scientific diagram by our scienticians. I meant to say diagramma, excuse my pronunciation. So we have with Marshall McLuhan's Four Laws of Media describe how new media interacts with existing media and human experience. What you get, and this works, let's not even think TV or social media or internet. Take it back to the original media. We go from speaking to one another, right? Grammar hadn't been invented. There was no such thing as a grammar error. Prior to grammar, no human being had ever spoken incorrectly. So from there, we introduce writing. Now we enhance the old one because now we're writing scripts and we're not just speaking spontaneously. We obsolesce the existing medium. We retrieve something we had somehow lost before, probably maybe a coherent story we imagined in our dreams as a sort of conceptual hallucination, and then we reverse something. So if you apply this to Utopia realized, which is America, then it becomes hell on earth. Now, I don't want to say we've got there yet, but there's only one direction. You might wonder what that's like, and it's not just the all the violence and the increase in violence, and that it's going to keep happening, and people are going to continue to break under the pressure because you're asking too much of a people who just nothing about their education, their survival, their training from last century prepared them to exist in this modern techno-feudal world. It doesn't matter that they were warned. It doesn't matter that there were sociologists and psychologists and religious figures every step of the way with their warnings, their prophecies, their this, that, the other, right? When the satire is no longer differentiable from real life, things take on their own meaning, or that's a sign of things having taken on their own meaning. And then you look to the mainstream media and you see that they can no longer be the release valves. And another way of saying it is they've assimilated all the villains, right? They've assimilated all the bad guys. They've learned everything they could to make Utopia what it is, to make room for what they can and exile the rest. So, what does the satire look like these days? This is on Instagram.
Economy is ruined, middle class doomed. Inflation to the moon, but boomers gonna boom. Can I read the room? Allergic to the truth, condescending attitude. Yeah, boomers gonna boom. We just worked harder for our money and we saved it. My 30K job got a house and vacation. So what is your excuse? Let's blame it on the youth while we hoarding all the loot. Yeah, boomers gonna boom. Born into a system built for us to win, acting like we earned it when it wasn't inherited. But we didn't pass it down, we dismantled it. The first generation doing better than our kids. Pay it forward, nah, I'ma get a Porsche. Watch them struggle for basic things we could afford. Pretend paychecks cover what they did before. Totally ignore the policies that we implored. Our house used to be our home, now it's an investment. A business model that we invented, but we're the only age group that are protected. Then turn around and lecture our kids for renting. Show us proof, won't believe it. Say we had advantages, nah, that can't be it. You can show us stats, percentages, and facts like a menu at a restaurant. We just can't see it. We'll just
He's so good. The look on his face is so good. I don't know what any of this stuff is. That's funny. Uh, so let's look a little bit further, though. We're digging through the wrappings and the layers. As Frank Zappa observed in the early 90s here, 1991, you could tell how things are going by the color coding, by the way the graphs look. Are they going up? Are they going down? Are they red? Are they green? But here specifically, he's talking about the American dad. So let's see what Frank Zappa has to say. In case you're wondering, American musician, he had a lot to say about our culture. He could kind of see like Baudrillard. And in this very special, which I think you should check out if you haven't, he basically covers his own version of basically what Baudrillard wrote is the Gulf War isn't real, right? The Gulf War never happened. But let's go on ahead and take a listen here.
MTV is showing us the new family unit. Then again, if you live in a neighborhood where they don't have gangs, your other options are you belong to the football team, which is another kind of a gang, or you belong to some other thing which is not a family.
And do you think this is different than, hasn't always happened with with baseball teams or with social clubs, or just this thing it's coming to you?
And this matters because they're just talking about basic organization within a society. The most basic unit has always been the family, and it was only culture and civilization that enabled it to kind of expand out from there, let's say. But let's keep
Younger
on.
age group now, is it, how does the MTV thing focus? Does it just make it much more a tighter pressure on the kids to actually?
I don't think MTV puts pressure on them to abandon the family. I just don't think that there are any families left. I mean, that's obviously an exaggeration, but the family is an endangered species in this country. And the idea of how a family ought to work or a reason for it to even exist, to the point now where the United States government is talking about governmental programs almost to mandate family existence. Is that pathetic or what?
Now, it's easy to think that what he's speaking as a conservative here, but he's talking about how the fact that you can see it in the programming, the desperation, the kind of the fluff, right? And the way that they speak, you could see that they were already waxing nostalgic for this thing that was destroyed incidentally by the system, right? Utopia starts with a great family story, and it kind of goes to shit from there, right?
And then they talk about family-oriented shows where people would kind of wish there was such a thing as a family, because you can sell a lot of interesting things to a family as a unit. You know, families that are units are interesting, have interesting consumer possibilities. I think there's a nostalgia for families as an institution, but they're rapidly fading away. And what MTV is doing is just portraying the destruction, not causing the destruction.
Right. So for years, the moralists, the idealists, everyone gets it backwards. They keep looking at the production going, what's wrong with it? Why do we keep producing this? We need to change the production. And it's like, no, it's too late for that. You don't understand. These are you couldn't prove whether you have a symptom or an argument anyway. And your every action you engage in further heats up the process.
But it's certainly the way I look at it. I see evidence in the staging of those videos that it's all about wild kids in the street roaming in packs, huddling together for protection against the hostile outside world. That's the subtext of a lot of it.
Chilling if you're familiar with what modern social media looks like with the kids. It makes the last century and the previous generations look quaint in their youth. Think Bobby Sue and Susie Lee down at the soda shop, getting a pizza pie for a penny, that kind of thing.
And then along comes the family network. Where does that fit in? What sort of gaps that trying to fill in?
Well, I think that the whole idea of the family network is just a front for the religious broadcasting. They put on shows like The Flying Nun and The Talking Horse. And
When I was a kid, I remember The Flying House. Was that the one with the kind of anime Jesus characters? But same thing. That would come on as a kid, and like a lot of shows on TV, that was your signal, your sign to change it, to look for something better. But usually you recognized by the programming that was on that it was that now the desert of TV, like it turned into the desert. Now all the good cartoons are off, until later that afternoon or early evening or late at night, right?
stupid shit like that. And then when you're not looking, here comes Pat Robertson with yet another telethon telling people to pray to save America from homosexuals.
Oh, let's see. Talking about how the church and the government resemble gangs and people will always want to be a part of such organizations. Got someone to do the job, organize it, carry the money, so on and so forth. So now they're talking about the family and the family sloganeering and corporate advertising.
Welcome from, Christmas greetings from our family to your family.
Mm-hmm.
The restaurants talk about, join the McDonald's family.
Exactly. The family has become a nostalgia word.
This is already in the 1990s. We're keeping this ghost alive, but here it is.
Tree will be like that one day.
Family tree.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-oh. So if you do the math from that projection and prediction, he's basically, it does become an Orwellian mass of proles, or like Brave New World, a class of manufactured human beings who just have no identity anymore. It's everything about them in their lives is completely engineered and manufactured by other entities, and dare I say, I don't want to say powers, but other forces work in the world that create the threads of fate of the individual and the family. At least here in Utopia.
Because America is built on the family. It's the whole,
That's
middle America, it's mum, apple pie, the family, all those sort of values. That's part of the mythology and part of the
Well, it may exist in middle America. There may be pockets of resistance, but not in this town.
What about sort of the side of American television, which we see also the antiseptic, the Cosby shows, where you have these smiling.
What I want to know is, this show has been rated so highly for eternity, and I don't know anybody who ever watched it.
I didn't either. It was in our faces as kids and in the 80s and 90s, but I never I never knew anyone who watched it.
I mean, somebody must have, but I can't imagine that the huge numbers that the
Oh,
average
and by the way, and I lived in black neighborhoods, and I had lots of black friends, just to be clear, North St. Louis, other parts of the Midwest. So it's not like, I was there in the trailer park or in the suburban complex going like, none of us here watch Cosby, obviously, right? But
advertisers were accepting as reality and therefore paying large dollars to put minutes on that program. I can't really see that those numbers were ever based on reality.
Do you think those sort of shows capture are they sort of like a mythology? Because they have these happy families and Ray Charles comes for dinner and things like that. Do you think that's part of a mythology rather than a reality, is it?
I think that it's part of a maintenance program, a government approved, not sponsored, but certainly approved
FCC,
status quo maintenance program.
that kind of covers us there. And then going a little bit further, I have a video from the channel here, Unsolicited Marketing for Cadillac.
That's right, and
I know a few Bundys myself. But the interesting thing about Bundy-like characters in all sitcoms, the universal rule of all sitcoms is fathers are weak, fathers are bad, mothers are wise. Now, this has been with us since the 50s. And this has sent a very bad psychological message to the entire society. It has made fatherhood almost a criminal activity. And
You'll at least get anger management.
a lot of people would be dissuaded from ever becoming a dad based on the images that are presented to the public from American television shows. And this goes all over the world.
Miller describes nicely how the 1960s sitcom, like the westerns that preceded them, negated the increasing powerlessness of white-collar males with images of paternal strength and manly individualism. Yet by the time these sitcoms were produced, the world of small business, whose virtues were the Hugh Beaumontish ones of self-possession, probity, and sound judgment, had long since been superseded by what C. Wright Mills called the managerial demiurge.
Real quick, basically this is an essay from David Foster Wallace, and what he's saying is by the time you see these value systems ossified enough to be represented on TV, the reality of that living situation has already passed. This is like Marshall McLuhan saying about old Americans, boomer Americans, whatever they were, living in bonanza land, meaning by the time that show was on TV and the kids were having bonanza themed, cowboy Indians were popular in the culture and that kind of thing. By the time you were there, we were already past living like that. We weren't a prairie westward expansion pioneer culture of rugged individualists. We were already increasingly a domesticated, increasingly arguably retarded culture and people, blinded by our own utopia and its ideals.
The medium of our time, electric technology, everything from the light bulb to the telephone to the computer to jets to nuclear energy, is changing everything. We are in the middle of a tremendous clash between the old and the new.
The medium does things to people, and they're always completely unaware of this. They don't really notice the new medium that is roughing them up. They think of the old medium because the old medium is always the content of the new medium, as movies tend to be the content of TV, and as books used to be the content, novels used to be the content of movies. And so every time a new medium arrives, the old medium is the content, and it is highly observable, highly noticeable. But the real roughing up and massaging is done by the new medium, and it is ignored. Ordinary people prefer to live in the immediate past, a bonanza style. That is, modern suburbanite livers in USA live not in modern suburbia, they live in bonanza land. One stage back, the Cartwright territory is a much more comfortable territory to live in than modern suburbia. That is, emotionally, it is much more gratifying and secure to live in bonanza land, and it is the old environment. Every time a new environment forms with a new medium, people go back and live in the old one. When the Cartwrights were actually running USA, say back in 1850, 1870, people weren't living on the frontier at all. They didn't live in Bonanza Land when Bonanza Land actually existed. They were living back in Jeffersonian democracy.
Are you living in today's world?
Now that we have an electronic sort of world, we live imaginatively in the old frontier world of, well, horse opera.
This is just some random, sums it up. There'll be first impressions, but no deeper than that. That's kind of the essence of Baudrillard's America. And that's the celebration of us Americans as we are in our shallowness. We don't have the depth and introversion of Europe. We are an arrogant, nasty people.
Nobody's got a family, because who wants to hang out with a dad? Dads are like Bundys.
I think we saw this. But it's to get to a point, is that what David Foster Wallace talks about, just like what Jean Baudrillard talks about, is Alexis de Tocqueville. And if you don't know who Alexis Charles Henry Clairol Comte de Tocqueville is, he was a French aristocrat and diplomat and political philosopher and historian. He came over here basically to kind of do his information reports on America, to kind of report back to the motherland what it's like, what are the people like, what are they getting up to these days. And he could see back in the, whatever it was, 1800s, 1890s, what I think maybe, as he wrote his most known works, as they say, Democracy in America. Let's see. The Americans have no neighbors. That's apparent. Americans exist in their own world. There are no neighbors. There are no other nations. And consequently, they have no great wars, whoops, or financial crisis, whoops, or inroads or conquest to dread. Spoke too soon. So you can see the utopianism from this other Frenchman even back when. But there's this interesting part in here where he kind of, this is the better part. Where should I say more? Who does not understand what is about to follow before I have expressed it? Taken as a whole, literature in democratic ages can never present as it does in the periods of aristocracy, an aspect of order, regularity, science, and art. Oh no. So already he's saying these aren't an intelligent people. These aren't an aristocratic people. Its from will, on the contrary, ordinarily be slighted, sometimes despised. Style will frequently be fantastic, incorrect, overburdened, and loose, almost always vehement and bold, right? America, if one thing is bold, back to Nike, just do it. Authors will aim at rapidity of execution more than at perfection of detail. Right, that's for money. Small productions will be more common than bulky books. There will be more wit than erudition, more imagination than profundity, and literary performances will bear marks of the untutored and rude. Vigor of thought, frequently of great variety and singular fecundity. Ooh, good word. The object of authors will be to astonish, rather than to please, and to stir the passions more than to charm the taste. Here and there, indeed, writers will doubtless occur who will choose a different track, and who will, if they are gifted with superior abilities, succeed in fighting readers, in spite of their defects or their better qualities, right? That's like Ralph Waldo Emerson. He's almost a fluke, an accident, a mistake. In the whole of American culture, there's nothing like him, right? But these exceptions will be rare, and even the authors who shall so depart from the received practice and the made subject of their works will always relapse it into some lesser detail, right? In meaning, instead of the European trend to endlessly build off of it, America just dawdles with toys. And so for those of you who aren't, because I wouldn't blame you. For those of you who aren't educated in snobbish 1890s aristocratic French speak, he's saying that this is idiocracy. He's saying these people like sex and money. He's saying they're stirred by passions and poor taste more than by class or style, right? But that was just the benefits of being an American, right? That was the benefits of being a utopian. So we're getting here close to, and in this, we're getting close to the end of what I had in mind to cover for this quick synopsis and peek at Baudrillard's America. Because from here, I want to let you know that the plan is we're going to cover this today, and from there, I want to cover not just more modern and postmodern philosophy, but before we get too lost in in that direction, which is the future of no future, I'd like to take a glance backwards in time at human values and philosophy over time. For those of you who don't know, philosophy is that line of thought and questions where we question, what does it mean to be a being? What is being and becoming? What do we mean by being and becoming? Who is the type of being to ask a question on being and becoming? What is that being in time, right? You kind of go on from there. Baudrillard says, all great powers have at some time or another created their monumental avenues, which provided, as one looked down on them, a miniature representation of the infinitude of empire. But the Aztecs at Teotihuacan, the Egyptians in the Valley of the Kings, Louis at Versailles, and created these synthesis in an architecture that was their own. Here in Washington, it's a hodgepodge, it's a mishmash. It screams populace. The vast panorama that stretches around the Lincoln Memorial is made up of a series of museums encapsulating our entire universe from Stone Age to Space Age, right? That's the thing about our TV culture, is it's totalizing, it's encompassing. The reason why the desert works is a symbol for the real and for life in America. The reason why it's so captivating still is it's the one thing large enough that can blot out even the American culture and the American ego. Even the American ego realizes it has no place in the desert. This desert that it appropriated, these strange lands where these are foreign lands, adopted and taken by foreigners. They don't have history here. They don't have culture here. They don't have a long line or tradition of anything here. They blundered their way over here from elsewhere, right? You know, that these are the orphans in the desert, as John Fonte once described Los Angeles, you sad flower in the sand. You know, that's a morbid European analysis versus that utopian American analysis, which only sees growth and prosperity and intentionally rules out everything else that must be obsolete within Utopia. So going back to Baudrillard here, talking about, you know, what is the ejection and rejection of the human in Utopia? And I kind of covered this in the last video where we talked about America disenfranchising, but where did that come from? Right. So for those of you like that comedy video I played earlier from Instagram, the guy joking about the boomers and the poverty of the working class and the youth, you know, you have to understand what Baudrillard says here goes, that being poor in America, being working poor, being homeless and insane, that's no argument. You've already lost your credibility because you're a bum. You're a loser. You're the type of loser that the American system needs to crush out at home and abroad so it can announce its utopian vision to the world that you losers have been defeated and America means victory forever, because that's what utopia means, right? So it goes on. This is what he's saying here. This easy life knows no pity. Its logic is a pitiless one. If utopia has already been achieved, then unhappiness does not exist, right? You're the problem. It's like Brave New World. The reason why Brave New World's a utopia is because there's no place for unhappiness, because everyone's happy all the time. All the time. What's wrong with you? You're the problem. So if utopia has been achieved, unhappiness does not exist, the poor are no longer credible. Right, you're bums, you're losers, you're stupid. Why didn't you be as smart as your family? Or better yet, why weren't you born into a different class? Or why weren't you born in your parents' time period? Stupids. Right? So if America is resuscitated, then the massacre of the Indians did not happen. Vietnam did not happen. Iraq and Afghanistan didn't happen. While frequenting I added that because this was back in the 80s, right? But now we know. While frequenting the rich ranchers or manufacturers of the West, Reagan has never had the faintest inkling of the poor in their existence. No, those are the people you write out of the Hollywood script, because remember, Reagan was an actor. So he was the perfect puppet, the perfect stand-in, and I can't help but think of was it Peter Gabriel, Peter Frampton, one of those Peter guys. That song, Disturbed redid it. I'm getting lost in the weeds, but it's just another example of American culture at work where the grotesque puppet on TV is a simulation of the gross puppet on TV. So Reagan had never had the faintest inkling of the poor in their existence. Right, screw them, they're losers. Nor the slightest contact with them. Right, different classes, right? They don't belong, they don't mix, that's oil and water. So he knows only the self-evidence of wealth, the tautology of power, the whiteness of teeth, the power of crest, TM, which he magnifies to the dimensions. Oh, and good hair, right? To be a president, you have to have good hair, or at least orange skin. or indeed of the whole world. The have-nots will be condemned to oblivion, to abandonment, to disappearance, pure and simple. From the last video, right? And this is where earlier in the text he talked about the right lane must exit always struck him as a sign of destiny in America. So this must exit, right? This obsolescence of whole classes and generations of people. Because look, what happened to the silent generation, the greatest generation? They're dead and gone. Some of them are still rotting away in old folks' homes, and I bet they're never visited by their kids, but I'm sure the kids took the money, right? So this is a must exit logic. Poor people must exit, right? So do the old, the infirm, the elderly. America is a young man's game. You got to be young, pretty, or if not, you can be old, creepy, and turtle-like. You can be anything, but so long as you have money, right? The ultimatum issued in the name of wealth and efficiency wipes them off the map. So it sucks to suck. As Terrence McKenna said, even in the 90s, as this new tech waves were taking over, the devil takes the hindmost. He always has, right? And rightfully so, since they show such bad taste, is to deviate from the general consensus, right? That was your fault for maybe taking those risks, for being too original, for being too different, right? For being an introvert in an extrovertive world, because this gets into Jungian territory. To quote Jung, America is an extroverted place. The introvert does not stand a chance in hell in America. Now, I think they did as creative types, but I think that's all just food for the machine at this point, right? They scraped all the artists with AI, right? You're not needed any longer, just like most of the blue collar work can be shipped over to India, China, or done by, illegal aliens or Americans for a cheap price. So within the orbit of subsidized socialization has all now fallen within the scope of providential presidential decree, as though the last judgment had already happened.
It's never going to get any better. Don't look for it. Be happy with what you got.
Right, so apocalypse already happened. The good have been found virtuous, the others have been cast out. Sucks to suck. No need for goodwill anymore. No need for goodwill anymore. No need to feel guilty. The third world, which no one mourns, has been obliterated. Sucks to suck. After all, it only served to give the rich a bad conscience. Oh, not to do that, but that reminds me actually.
Good, honest, hardworking people. White collar, blue collar, doesn't matter what color shirt you have on. Good, honest, hardworking people continue. These are people of modest means. Continue to elect these rich cocksuckers who don't give a fuck about them. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about you. They don't care about you at all. At all. At all. Yeah.
I recently covered actual photo of Bangladesh, right? That Bangladesh is the future of the model, talking about the movie WALL-E. Here we see WALL-E and Eva explore the wonderful world of the future in Disney's WALL-E, right? And saying that Bangladesh is the modern city of the future, where the future lives, right? If you can imagine the future of the world, it's very Bangladeshi, it's very India-like. Water-ish liquid flowing into river of the damned in Bangladesh, right? All those tasty chemicals. So Baudrillard is saying, right, forget those places. It's their own fault. They did it to themselves. Their fault for buying our lies. So after all, it only served to give the rich a bad conscience, and all efforts to save it were certain to end in failure. Right, can't stop progress. That is all over. Long live the fourth world. Right, and the fourth world is that obsolescent space of progress that keeps pushing itself into the grave. To save it would be certain to end in failure, right? Because it's to be squandered to begin with. That's what they realize. So why would you attempt to save it when it's yours to squander? See, you're missing the ego trip, the power gasm. I think most people aren't evil enough or utopian enough or megalomaniacal enough to really understand how crazy Americans are, especially the people who own this place. Right, Utopia has arrived. If you aren't part of it, get lost. Right, this is where we could say Brave New World was a more humane utopia because they actually gave people the option to leave. They said, we have an island set up for you because, yeah, you don't belong here. You cause trouble for us. Why would we want you? But rather than making them stay and milking them for what they're worth, right? So they knew better. So the disenfranchised who have no voice are condemned to oblivion, thrown out to go off and die their second-class death, second, third, fourth, all the way down to the homeless, right? And I think it's part of the plan because you can't let if you let homeless people buy homes, now all of a sudden you can't tell them apart from wealthy people. You can't tell them apart from the higher classes because you've let these homeless people buy homes. So buying homes in America is for homeless people. You lose your rights one by one, first your job, then your car, and then your driver's license goes. So does your identity.
How long you been out here and how you get like this?
I'm good.
You wanna do drugs?
No.
So why you sitting on the ground?
I'm waiting for the bus.
Pardon me. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
This way, entire swathes of the population are falling into oblivion, being totally abandoned. It's kind of like the hobos of the last generation. We talk about them like they're this quaint story, when in reality it was just generations of men being obsolesced by technology and organizational patterns, where, especially in modern times, the sophisticated human, public relations dominant, human resources owned operations of the corporations preclude the poor, the stupid, and the general, most of the masses who are too crude, too violent to be able to keep up in a sophisticated world of doublespeak and high class production, right? So, and consumption is the main thing. Basically, Baudrillard says, I know your class by what you throw away, not what you consume. So enfranchisement was an historical event. It was the emancipation of the serfs and the slaves, the decolonization of the third world, and in our societies, the various social and political rights, workers' rights, the vote, sexual liberation. Right, all this stuff already happened. It's not going to happen again. Right? That energy has been used up. What historical revolution or momentum? Right? They already built Utopia. Again, who needs to produce anything when you can consume it all, including the workers and their labor? Right? You can just burn them out to death forever, right? That's there's no way around it, is what I'm saying. This is our fate. These things were set in course a long time ago, which is why here on the channel we're examining not just history as of 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago, hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago. So, but whereas the third world still had a political meaning, even if it was a resounding worldwide failure, right? We are the world, we are the children, right? Bangladesh sucks to suck. We don't care about you anymore. No one's coming to save you or help you. You've ruined yourself. You've ruined your lands. You've sold out your own people. China did it too. So the first world has none. It is transpolitical. This is a result of our societies withdrawing political interest of our advanced societies, right? So we're no longer interested in, building out networks of relations and power. They're already there. Rather, withdrawing social interest. So also pulling back from these loveless, poor, stupid masses, leaving them to rip each other to shreds, to fight each other for scraps, to fight each other for a position in the hierarchy. So of that excommunication, which affects precisely the communications-based societies. Right. What do we need? The telegraph worker was put out of work by the radio engineer. The radio engineer was increasingly put out of work by the TV engineer. The TV engineer, right, increasingly put out of work by the lone person on social media, right? It's a big competition. These media aren't necessarily working in tandem. Although from the corporate side, you see that the messaging is always uniform, which gets back to the tyranny or that alien that was lurking, as Baudrillard says, right? And that alien is just consumption coming to eat the people, right? The problem, so when people propose, oh, America is good, but it could be better, they're missing the fact that they already live in utopia. It's not going to get any better. So, and it's true on a world scale that these events have already happened. These people have already been created. So it can only be compared to the thousands of tons. Okay, we already read this in the last video, but I didn't want to read that necessarily the whole thing again. There are none of the elements of a future revolution, right? Baudrillard's making clear, right? If disenfranchisement is the intentional obsolescence of people, and the problem is the people themselves, meaning even if you change the system, you'd be still stuck with, as Baudrillard calls Americans, the quintessential and original simulations of human beings, right? And he doesn't mean, it's not that we stop being complex biological organisms. It's not that we stopped having dreams and feelings. It's just we have no relation to each other or the world. So we're sort of like just dumb animals going around touching things and getting fried in their environment or eating the wrong food, kind of like it's always been, but now with the rich veneer of utopia, which as it reverses quickly goes to hell. So again, this has been a brief coverage of Baudrillard's America. From here, we're going to kind of go backwards a bit to his Consumer Society, some of his earlier works, to examine these aspects of production, consumption, and then value creation and value assertion and nihilistic propagation in the face of a dead, a living dead system, a dead utopian dream. And then from there, we're going to go even further backwards to original philosophy and human values. And by that, I mean, yes, the Greeks, Socrates, Plato, the pre-Platonics. Namely, I want to cover a lecture series by American professor Rick Roderick. I think I'll put some links in case you want to check them out in advance. Do some philosophy react videos to at least a few of his philosophy and human value videos, as well as the postmodern condition, or self under siege in the 20th and now 21st century, where we can say with certainty, indubitably, Rick Roderick, you were correct. Baudrillard, you were correct. It's not that there aren't subject-object distinctions, it's that they've been collapsed and that human subjects have disappeared. Does that make us robots or replicants? No. Does that mean we've been denied anything? No, because that's the definition of hyper-reality, right? We're laboring under the illusion that we lost something. Lost what? Our noble human story, our European roots, our this, that, and the other. We lost our organizing. We lost our third spaces. We lost. And you see why Zarathustra says something like, listen to you modern present day men. All of you say you're so anemic and thin in the ribs. It's as if a god stole a rib from you and created a girl from it, which is quite the sophisticated European insult to the modern man to say, snap out of it. You idiots, you didn't lose anything. You just exist in a simulated reality and cannot see or understand it yourself, which is part and parcel to the programming. So, where to go from there? I'm just getting carried away in the moment. Like I said, we're going to cover a lot of interesting topics in the videos to come. So if this is of interest to you, like, share, subscribe, share it with someone you know. I appreciate your time, your attention, and wherever this finds you, I hope it's well. And if we're all so fortunate as to be here tomorrow and the next day and the next day after that, I'll see you then. Take care. Bye. That's what it's like to be an American. Because you're programmed from an early age. You don't necessarily think oh, my childhood was shaped by marketers, but it absolutely was.